So this is a song called Built by Friends. And I feel like I'm like 25 miles from everyone, so I'm going to sit down. Oh, you can't sit. I will. So.
I've read all kinds of instructions of it.
So I came back, I was out in Maine in February, and I got off the plane, and at the same luggage carousel, Garrison Keillor got off the plane, and he was standing over there, and I was standing here, and I'd never met him before, and he's a pretty distinctive looking fellow. The red shoes and the all that kind of stuff. And so I couldn't help but not go up and introduce myself. And so I walked up to him and I introduced myself, and I told him what I felt about his work and in radio. And when he or his show quits doing what they're doing, it'll be a real void in the radioscape. And he looked at me, and I had bib overalls on and some bean duck boots and a flannel shirt. And he goes, "It's sure nice to be greeted by a Mainer." And I looked at him, and I go, "I'm from Southern Illinois." And he goes, "God, I've never known." He said, "What are you doing in Maine?" So I told him I was playing music and stuff. And, naturally I couldn't stop but reach into my pocket and hand him a Seventh Direction CD. And he looked at it, and he goes, "Well, what's the Seventh Direction thing?" And I explained to him, that there's, 7 directions, north, south, east, and west, above and below, and the most important and strongest is the one that's, hid and used and looked at least, and that's the direction of our hearts. And he looked at me and he's like, "That's pretty cool. Where's that come from?" And I explained that a little bit. And I said, a lot of the times when I'm listening to your radio show, I hear this common thread of community and people and special people in your. And I said, I've got a song called Built by Friends that is like about some of the people you talk about from like Wobegon. I said, it's track 12. You should, when you get in your car, put it in there and listen to it. And he kind of looked at me and goes, "Well, where do you get your inspiration for all these songs?" And I said, "Well, I bow hunt, with a traditional bow, and while I'm sitting in my stand in the fall, which is about 100 hours a year or so, I sit up there." And he goes, "While you're waiting to slay Bambi?"
Bambi's mom.
Yeah, and you can just hear Garrison Keillor saying, "While you're waiting to slay Bambi." And I looked up at him, and I said, "No," I said, "while I'm looking down and watching the world go by." And really that's what to me it's all about. And there's a couple of minutes in there where I might get a shot at a deer if I'm lucky.
Well, you got to include that then.
So this is a song that I think Garrison Keillor should have us play on Prairie Home Companion. And on this property, if you walk around, you'll see a fairly recently constructed pole barn that has a sign on it that says "Built by Friends."
Friends, I saw it.
And if you go down Springer Ridge outside of Carbondale, there's an old pole barn out there that's starting to get kind of grayed up, and the sign is still there. It's kind of weathered, but it says "Built by Friends" too. She came from Colorado to Southern Illinois. She came to call this place her home, and these hills her pride and joy. Just outside Bosquedale and south on Springer Ridge, there's a white farmhouse and an old pole barn that says "Built by Friends." I see her at McCanda Fest each time it rolls around, selling all the wares they've made to the folks from out of town. The pride shines from her face that's tanned and etched with time. As the 4-H girls pack it up, she turns and says goodnight. And as the sun goes down, Rose closes the chickens in by the light of the moon. Her cows come rolling home, and the lights were on. You know the lights were on. The lights were on at Rose Lipe's farm that night. I see her on election day, each time it rolls around, passing out the ballots at town hall. She patiently confirms your name and address, though she's known you 100 years. She tallies up the votes and goes home. And as the sun goes down, Rose closes the chickens in by the light of the moon. Her cows come rolling home, and the lights were on. You know the lights were on. The lights were on at Rose Lipe's farm that night. Word came round last summer now that Rose had taken ill. Last I heard she wasn't doing well. And as I drove down Springer Ridge on that cool autumn night, it's what I didn't see that gave me a chill. And as the sun was going down, I looked for Rose to close the chickens in by the light of the moon. Her cows come rolling home, and the lights weren't on. No, the lights weren't on. No, the lights weren't on at Rose Lipe's farm that night. I remember when I moved back from California, it was probably the smartest thing I ever did. We lived out right next to Rose Lipe in a little bitty dirt ball remodeled farmhouse that the landlord said we couldn't bring our dogs in, so we snuck them in the back door. And we'd go down, and Emily was about, well, she's still in a carriage, and I'd push her down there, and she was so small, and Rose raised all kinds of fowl. She had peacocks. Everyone sound like a peacock on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, it feels like I'm playing at the St. Louis Zoo. Whenever they have us come up, they put us next to the peacock cage. And when the sun goes, so Emily would be in her little walker deal, and Rose Lipe was about this tall, and she had these piercing blue eyes, and she was so short she couldn't see over the dash of her car, or the truck, you know. Where is she? And she would look between the steering wheel and the dash, and you'd swear there was a '61 Ford driving down Springer Ridge with no one driving it. And I remember taking her down there, and she was such a cool lady, and she'd go ahead, pet the goose, and Emily's like, and the goose is going, and Emily's like, who's this mean lady? Peacocks and geese, and she had all kinds of crazy critters over there. When she was almost 3 years before she passed away, she built a hand-hewn cabin. She just decided, I got nothing else to do. I've always wanted a cabin, so she built this cabin behind her place. Her daughter Cheyenne from the Bosquedel Baptist Church got everyone together, and like you guys here at Ondessonk put that pole barn up with the help of some folks and volunteers. they put that barn up in about a weekend, and because Rose needed the help and she didn't have much money. It's amazing what you can do when everyone kind of pitches in. I remember distinctly at a Macanda Fest, her back was hurting her, and she was wrapping up everything at the end of the day, and all the girls, the 4-H girls, were packing up all their doilies and stuff that they had made, and I could see her picking stuff up, and I was going to help her pick up boxes, and she was one of those people that refused help. You know, you go to pick, I got it. Stumpy, I got it.
Yeah, she's about this tall.
Yeah, you're looking up there, Stumpy. Word came round last summer now that Rose had taken ill. Last I heard she wasn't doing well. And as I drove down Springer Ridge on that cool autumn night, what I didn't see that gave me a chill. And as the sun was going down, I looked for Rose to close the chickens in. I was on my way to town by the light of the harvest moon, and the lights weren't on. No, the lights weren't on. No, the lights weren't on at Rose Lipe's farm that night. Who'll close the chickens in? Who will help those 4-H girls grow? Who will close the cows up in the barn? That's a song called Built by Friends.